So a couple of weeks ago, uh, it's summertime. We both are sitting around at the jewelry store, and I got an email from the Rappaport publication, which is part of the Rappaport online services that we do for diamond pricing. And one of the stories that they were highlighting was the dealings between Botswana and the DeBeers company. And it kind of stuck out to me a little bit because I was pretty sure that Botswana, or I think it was them, they were an independent country, and it just kind of struck me as odd that the Beers would have anything to say with what they do with their diamonds and how much of it is sold and whatever. And it kind of took me down this rabbit hole, which I then brought to you in the middle of the day because, we're bored. We're not bored, but in the summer at a jewelry store, things slow down a lot.
Yep. And two guys in a shop tend to talk.
Yeah. And I mean, at any shop, right? Like, so I brought this to you and I was just very curious as to what DeBeers is, because like I've grown up in the industry. So you always hear these fantastical tales, right? One of the ones that was very popular when I was younger was if you tried to work for DeBeers, you don't have a say in what it is that you're going to be selling. When you meet with them, they essentially hand you a black box and say, sell this in X amount of time. And that's it. That's what you do. You go. Oftentimes, and I don't know how true this is, but this is the story, right?
Right.
Oftentimes you didn't have a say on like quality cut. You had to move whatever they gave you. If you didn't like it, you could try to work for someone else, but all you're doing is working for another tentacle of their arm, of them,
Right.
You couldn't escape them. This is like early 90s, late 80s, these are all stories that my father's friends are telling him at the jewelry store because, they come in, they try to sell stuff to them. So then I got really curious, as I often do, of who started this company and what that was about. And, that's when I came to you and I'm like, hey man, I think there's something here. Like, I don't really know much about this person and I haven't found any podcasts, not many anyway, that really do a deep dive into who and what DeBeers is and how it got started. So I came to you and I'm like, hey, do you want to do a podcast, right?
Yeah. And I think it was a great question when you came to me originally and you said, I've been working in this industry for over 25 years and I know who DeBeers is, like I know the company, but I know nothing about them, like none of the intricacies. And considering they, for over a century, had the monopoly on diamonds, that's an avenue to explore.
Exactly. So anyways, then I got to, obviously this is all going to take place in the 1800s. And unless you've been living under a rock, you could say that the 1800s, not the most equal times of our human history, but I still wanted to know what motivated him.
Mm-hmm.
Like I think about what motivates me, living in America, right? Like when you stop and think about it, right? What gets you going on your day to day?
Yeah.
Like what are the cultural influences? Like, yeah, we all hear it, like America's number one,
Yeah.
And I think about how people act, because like if you think about it, today everything's about AI, and you see it in the news where the president is forbidding companies, like whole companies, from selling certain technological innovations to our quote unquote competitors, like the Chinese. they can't have many chips that can run AI, you know? So I was thinking about what it might have been like to live in his time, like growing up. What made Rhodes the way he was,
Right.
you know? Because that's who we're talking about here, right?
Yeah, we're talking about Cecil Rhodes.
And his
Yeah.
compatriots,
Exactly.
which I had no idea. I thought it was a singular person.
Me too, right? Because whenever you look up DeBeers, it's always Rhodes. That's all you see,
Right.
you know, and at least, you know, until he passed away. But yeah, because I mean, what I didn't realize was, you know, I thought that, you know, Cecil Rhodes had gone down, and we're not going to obviously get into that part of the story yet, but I just thought he'd gone down to South Africa, was wealthy, bought all the land, and that was the end of it. And technically that's what happened, but he built it. You know, he built his wealth, right? He didn't just start off as an extremely wealthy person and just buy everybody out. Like it took
He was an
a
extremely
long
wealthy
time.
person, but yeah, go on.
Yeah, but it took a long time. It took a long time for him to get there. I mean, he was there, you know, in 1870
Mhm.
and didn't actually own all of this property until what, 1880 something? You know, so it's 10 years of him like figuring this out. You know, and that's, if you think about it, 10 years building something, that's a long time.
It is.
You know, in just normal life. In history, it's nothing. But yeah, I mean, and all the people that were associated with him that helped him build these things that really don't get any limelight whatsoever.
Right, right. That's true. You know, there's a couple, you know. But like I said, for me, like, I'd like to go in this podcast at the beginning of it, I like to go into like the time leading up to him being him to begin with, like on this episode, right? Like,
Mhm.
because we can totally cover who he was. I mean, like, sure, anybody with Google can just look him up, and it's like, okay, so he was born in Bishop's Stortford. Never heard of that place, by the way. On July 5th, 1853, right? Hershire, England. I don't even know how they're
Hertfordshire.
Hertfordshire.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's an HER, not HAR.
Yeah.
And I kept typing it as an HAR. I don't know why. You know, and died in March 26th, 1902. So the man died at 49.
Yeah.
The average life expectancy of that time was 47. Like if you were 47,
You made it.
you made it.
Yeah.
That's nuts.
It's crazy.
I'm 42. I
Yeah.
got 5 more years of life in 1902. You know what I mean?
I'm pretty sure Cecil Rhodes wasn't running 100 milers,
No,
you know, but also he had the you know, bad lungs, health
I'm
problems.
talking about
But
your
yeah,
average life expectancy for the time.
yeah.
I mean, that's nuts. And if you think about it, like, aside from them just swimming through cancer,
Mhm.
everything that they did was by hand. Like, I started to try to put myself in their place of having to dig the earth, right? Because at the beginning, most diamonds could be found within 10 feet,
Right. You just had these alluvial deposits that were just
right
dirt.
on the surface.
Yeah. And you just walked around,
Essentially.
picked them up,
Yeah,
and went on your way.
exactly. You know, and this drew everybody in
Mhm.
from all over the world.
Yeah.
You know, you had people that were part of the gold rush, just dropping everything and running to South Africa.
Yeah. Yeah. They estimated there were 5,000 people that came between 1869 and 1870, right? Immigrants that came, 5,000. And then within a year, there were 250,000 people moving to that area, which was just nothing before these people found diamonds.
Exactly.
Like 250,000 people, which at that time is not insubstantial.
No, it's not.
Like, especially for an undeveloped part of the country.
People had to travel 700 miles to get to these fields.
Yeah.
700 miles on what? Horseback?
If that, foot sometimes.
You know, how long would that take you? That would take you months.
It's insane. I mean, you had some
or weeks at least. You
yeah,
know?
you had some African tribesmen that were 1,000 miles away that would walk there on foot because their chieftain had told them, "We need money for guns to buy from the British."
Yeah.
And then go work there for like 3 to 6 months.
I mean,
earn
but
enough
if you're
money
living
to-
in Africa, of course you need guns.
Yeah,
There
but it's
are
like
lions out there.
you'd work there. Yeah. You'd work. That's what they needed them for.
Exactly.
They needed, but like they would work for 3 to 6 months. They'd make 10 shillings a week, and a used gun. The cheapest used gun was £3.
That's crazy.
Yeah, and
I don't
that's
understand the money either.
so it's
Know that I researched that.
no. I just Google's a
Like
great thing.
how many shillings per pound?
10.
Oh.
No, yeah. So it's just rounded off to hundreds.
So,
right?
they're using
it's
base
just like
10 for their money.
right.
So, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, according to what I saw on Google. But so you'd work for quite a while, especially because you had to pay for yourself for food,
Right.
lodging, all this stuff.
It was all self-supported.
Yeah, and so if you wanted a nicer firearm, and these were all used already by the British military and being sold at the diamond fields, and a nicer weapon was £12. Yeah, so most of these guys would come, work for a few months, turn right back around, and walk the 1,000 miles back up to wherever they were.
So if you're asking me, like, the nutrition of this whole endeavor was probably horrendous, because you're getting the exercise. There's a lot of walking. There's a lot of digging. I don't know if you guys have ever chopped wood, dude. That's a lot of labor, But, yeah. So like you start looking at his life, and it's like, okay, so in those 49 years of his life, he accomplished a good amount of things. Now, I don't want to make this podcast into like, I mean, the guy was a staunch imperialist.
Oh yeah. Oh,
he was a product of his times.
He was, yeah. But he was also like fanatical about it.
Fanatical.
Wanted to retake America and reclaim them as the colonies.
Sort of. It's he did lament them leaving. But like the things, for example, Rhodes Scholarships. I didn't know that he was the Rhodes in which they referenced.
Yeah.
And this is like, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Rhodes Scholarships and what they are, but they are like highly regarded Nobel Prize winners. Like the guy who invented, what is that called? Penicillin was a Rhodes Scholar, Yeah. And it's a way to be able to study while you travel and still get a good education from Oxford, and
which is exactly what he did.
That's exactly what he did, but he wasn't the first to come up with this model. Apparently back in those times, there was many that were very similar to it,
Yeah.
But one of the things that he leaves behind in his final will is just the funding, the trust set up for this to take place, Yeah. But he opens it up and he he was all about Anglo supremacy, but again, product of his times, right? He wrote this thing called the 1877 Confession of Faith.
Let's hear about this.
Where I quote, I contend that we are the finest race in the world, and that the more the world, sorry, I need to make this bigger. I'm actually kind of blind at my age. That's the 42 thing, The more the world we inhabit, the better it is for the human race. Just fancy those parts that are at present inhabited by the most despicable species of humans. Yeah, and it goes on and on and on, but
classic
1800 stuff,
Yeah.
But in his final thing on his will, he opens up the Rhodes Scholarships to be, what did he say? Let me just read what he says. He goes, I desire to encourage and foster the appreciation of the advantages which I implicitly believe will result from the union of English-speaking people throughout the world, and encourage in the students from North America that who would benefit from the American scholarships. Rhodes are also bequeath scholarships to German students in the hope that a good understanding between England, Germany, and the United States and America will secure peace of the world. He opened it up to anybody outside of race and religious beliefs. So it's like he knew in the back of his mind that eventually everybody would coexist,
right?
In a way,
Yeah.
And I feel like one of the things when we were first researching this is you brought up is he had a lot of dealings with the Jewish community,
Yeah.
which historically hasn't had a lot of good dealings with the Anglo-Saxon community.
It's very true. Yeah. I mean, that's
Wasn't one of his partners?
yeah. So one of his partners was Jewish. Another one was German.
Yeah.
The one that actually
Boy, if he could have just
helped
seen
him the
into the
most.
future, like
I know,
past
right. Just the
1914.
two of them.
Whoa.
Yeah. Oof. And one of them was German, which I guess some people refer to as his mentor, Alfred Bate.
Okay.
And then you have what's his name, Barney Barnato, right? Is Jewish,
Right.
along with his brother, who had connections to the London Diamond Syndicate down the road.
Right.
And so that's who, they kind of joined together for a short period of time so that they could buy out the rest of the Kimberley mine eventually down the road.
Right.
So he had to work with a lot of people of Jewish descent, practicing Jews.
Yeah.
Because they were just already ingrained in the diamond industry at this point.
That's wild.
Yeah, I mean, and you had no choice because the London Diamond Syndicate, who controlled all of the diamonds coming in and out of London and England at that point, all Jewish.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense.
Yeah.
I think. Why were they all Jewish?
Well, so a lot of we talked about how Jews are kind of vilified throughout history. So they had to create their own ways to accumulate wealth. And so what they would do is they would stay within families, both extended and close. So if you were, in England and you had a brother, right, or a cousin who worked at a bank, well, you'd say, okay, well, I'm in England. I don't have a lot of opportunities here. My cousin, who's a banker, can get me a loan. I can take that loan and then go to Africa, where we have a colony, right? So it's free trade because it's a colony. And so I'll go buy a parcel of land with that loan and then hit it big. And I've already got another cousin who works for the Diamond Syndicate,
right?
Who I can already have a connection, I have an into. I don't have to create any business connections. I don't have to walk around with cigars to door,
or however they did
however
it in
they
the
do
1800s.
it, just a little anecdotal thing. But
right.
That's what, that's how they were able to build this wealth and this network.
Right.
Essentially, because it was all family and friends within the Jewish community.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you mentioned something there where that was the story at the time, right? Well, that was the story when this first started to happen. Is you go to South Africa and you hit it big. It's in that book. What's it called? Diamonds, Gold, and War. I like to read it, but mostly I've just been listening because we're so busy at the shop or here at home.
Absolutely.
So one of the things that they keep coming back to is how there were stories that were constantly coming to England of people traveling to South Africa, spending a couple of hours mining, digging in the dirt, and immediately hitting 30,000 pounds, turning around, coming back home. And 30,000 pounds in 1800s was a good amount of money.
Yeah. Your average working class citizen in England, right? This is factory work at this time because it's the period of industrialization, right? The Victorian era.
Going. Right.
They're making around 100 pounds annually.
What? Annually,
right? So your working class person makes about 100 pounds, right? And that's all salary. Your middle class makes between 100 to 1,000 pounds annually, and that's between salary and what they call profit, right? And I'll explain profit for upper class because upper class makes over 1,000 pounds annually profit. That's just profit, and that's from I have it written down here.
Net?
No, they call it profit.
But we know it as net.
Exactly, and that is from property, rent, and interest that they own. That's it.
Whoa.
So it's essentially passive.
Yeah. Passive income.
Yeah. So 100%. Old money, right?
Old money.
So your family owns land.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And then if you want to go into, banking or create your own loans, then you're gaining money off of their interest that you loan to people. So yeah, I mean that was and so 30,000 pounds in a few days is unreal.
Yeah.
And that's the fortune of a lifetime for these people.
Yeah, for sure. I don't know. I often try to like put myself in their frame of thought, like just the era between 1850 to 1860, right? That's like the height of imperialist England,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Actually, it's funny because
I mean, I think that's why we all fixate on that time, right? Like that's the middle of the Victorian era.
yes.
Like Queen Victoria had just come in what 1837.
Mhm.
Uh, she we've stepped away from Napoleon. You know,
Yeah.
that was a big threat to them, and now they're just like really coming into their own.
Yeah, and they're working on colonialization at this point.
Expansion.
Expansion.
Yeah,
They in 1948,
yeah.
there's literally that year, 1948 was called the year of revolutions, right? And
19. You
so
mean 1848?
1848, thank you.
Yeah, yeah,
So they avoided that somehow,
yeah.
right? Like
yeah.
England avoided the year of revolutions. I mean, you're talking about like Ireland, France, Germany,
Everybody
Hungary,
wants to be
Italy,
their own.
Denmark, Moldavia, and then Wallachia, which was Romania,
Right.
and Poland. All of these
Wallachia.
countries.
They should go back to being called Wallachia.
I like that.
But go on.
But all these countries had some sort of revolutionary activity, major
Right.
enough to
Just
be in the papers.
Governmental shifts.
Yeah. And the only little tiny revolution that happened in England was a liberal party that came around that was immediately quashed. And the House of Commons became the liberal, like you had the Tories and the other party, right? The Tories were the conservatives.
Right.
And then so you had the conservatives and the liberals in England. And yeah, I mean, and so they somehow managed to avoid all of this. So they were the most stable politically and the most wealthy.
In all of Europe.
Yeah, because they didn't have to worry about funding the government for their military action at home.
Right.
Whereas all of these other people have political instability, so they can't focus on foreign affairs.
That's cool. That's crazy.
And so
that makes a lot of sense because, starting from, I think, 1851, right?
Mhm.
You get the Great Exhibition, which is like this grand event that goes in England where designers showcase everything from the British Empire, from all over its reach, they have exhibitions on science, industry, art, everything that they were into right at the moment. In 1852, Dr. David Livingstone begins exhibition of Zambes, Zambes, Zambezi.
Okay.
Yeah, the man who. Here's what my notes say. The man whom, and these are all from my new favorite website, which is
Oh yeah, I need to look this up.
you need to look this up. It's where did I write it down? It's called anglotopia.net. .net, yes. And their slogan is Anglotopia for Anglophiles.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure I already donated just by
I'm sure
by being on this website.
I think you have.
My goodness.
No, but they do have a lot of really nice breakdowns of like timelines and what was going on, and they kind of go through the whole list of everything that they mentioned. The Crimean Wars. In 1854, Dr. Snow discovers chloria origins. So he manages to stave off like a whole
Cholera.
Yeah. Cholera breakout in England. Daily Telegraph. The first Daily Telegraph is published. Big Ben cast. Big Ben comes on, and it's just like one good thing after another, with the exception of the Indian Rebellion. But then the next year, they completely take over India. So by 1858, India's under British rule. So in a way, to them, that's like, it's a good day.
It's fantastic. I mean, and so that leads into some of my notes, which is like these British colonies, right?
Right.
Offered opportunities abroad to those willing to travel and take a little bit of risk financially.
Yeah, of
right.
course.
And so you had a lot of people that would travel, they would emigrate to another colony where they were still citizens, and they would be able to
have all the benefits of being there.
All the benefits of being a citizen, being British, working, making a living wage, and then being able to send money back to their families in England.
Right.
A lot of people didn't take their families with them. And that goes back to the Victorian era of gender roles and all of that. We can get into that, but
we need to get into that later. But go on.
So the Irish potato famine, right? And this is just giving a couple crazy numbers, right? So between 1845 and 1849 to 1852 is kind of when it came out of it. You saw Irish immigrants moving to England and its controlled colonies because in this span of 5 to 7 years, over 1 million people died, right? And 2 million emigrated away from Ireland.
Wow.
Ireland's population at the start of this, on the eve of the famine, was only 8.5 million people. So over a quarter of their population left.
This was brought on by blight, correct?
Yes, the potato
blight that came from South America, because that's where potatoes are originally from.
Right. Yeah. So a quarter of your population. I mean, I can't even imagine a quarter of America's population just getting up and leaving in 5 years.
I mean, I don't know if you noticed, but my family immigrated here.
Yeah.
And I feel like a quarter of their population
is possible, same thing. Right?
I mean, that's what I don't. I mean, I totally understand that. You're in a bad situation, you get up and leave. You pack your family up and you go.
Yeah, but I mean, a quarter of a population. That's a lot of people. But English colonies were a fantastic opportunity for people who said, "So I can't survive."
Are the Irish considered English?
Yeah, so it's Britain.
British citizens.
Yeah, so it's Britain.
So they were able to travel to India and all these other countries and be just fine.
Yeah, because you were
with the exception that they were probably discriminated against for being Irish.
No, of course. So I mean, so
that goes without saying.
So in Great Britain, right? To this day, you still have England, Ireland, Wales, and Scotland. Right. So that's those 4
main,
now 5 with Northern Ireland countries. Right. But because of that, you're welcome to all of Great Britain's colonies.
Right.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then the 1840s were dubbed the Hungry 40s.
Yes.
I mean, it was difficult to get food.
Because of that.
It's because of that. And so
here's the thing that I always get kind of confused by is like, there's these gender roles in the Victorian era where women are said to be here and men are said to do this. Yet their monarchy was led by a woman.
Right. Yeah. Right. I know, right? Yeah.
It's I don't know. I always find it very confusing how they can compartmentalize that in that time.
Yeah. Well, you also saw, a shift to, I should say that you also saw a shift away from the monarchy.
Yes.
At this point.
Because that's when the prime minister starts to come in.
Exactly. And you've got your parliament at that point.
Right.
Right. And you have the 600 representatives in the House of Commons, which are all elected officials.
Yeah, of course.
And then you've got, they say, several hundred noblemen, right, who are the House of Lords.
Yeah.
The catch there is that if you wanted to vote before 1867, you needed to own land and be a man.
How much land?
I have no idea.
Interesting. I wonder if it was like the Roman thing where if you had X amount of land with X amount of employees, that's how much your vote weighed.
Let's look into that.
Yeah.
Because, if you wanted to vote, I mean, I'm pretty sure it was possibly just, even if you owned your own property.
Yeah.
At that
point. It could have been. Right.
Because a lot of people didn't own their own homes at this point. Right. It was the 40s, right, at this point. So it was right before Cecil Rhodes was born. At this point, you had a lot of people that were working very long hours. It was the peak of industrialization. They were literally building this whole thing. And so the upper class was, at this point, owned the vast majority of land in the entire country, in Britain in general. So you've got all 4 countries at this point where a small minority, imagine that, owns most of the land.
That sounds familiar.
Right?
I feel like I'm living in that era.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
So they were able to control both their local and national politics.
Of course.
Yeah.
That sounds so familiar.
I know. However, with the terrible working conditions during this time and the Hungry 40s where people weren't getting enough food to eat, the working class actually saw a trend upward in living conditions, so that by the 1850s, most families in working class could afford extras like tobacco, alcohol,
right.
And even little vacations.
Now, it's my understanding that those were actually, I know that they're called extras, but I feel like tobacco and alcohol were a staple.
Yeah, but I'm saying they could afford them, right? Like there's a
Yeah.
difference, right? So a lot of people wouldn't purchase a home, and instead they would spend their money on extracurriculars.
Interesting.
Yeah,
That's
so,
very interesting.
You know,
so this is the world that Cecil Rhodes is born into.
Yep.
A world where, and it explains his view perfectly. You know, he was once quoted as saying, "To be born British is to win. You've already won. Like that's the cosmic lottery won, because you're coming into this. You know, your government has skipped over the hungry 40s, has navigated revolution, is expanding. It feels great to be British. You could travel anywhere. You have opportunities everywhere you go, and
and it's you've literally been born. You've literally been born into wealth and prosperity, or at least opportunity to gain that.
Right.
And
everybody else is just there to serve.
Yeah.
You know, and that's the outlook. And you can see it in his writing that that's the outlook that he had. And I don't know, I find it fascinating that this all happens. Everybody moves to, and by the way, as everybody is emigrating into South Africa, it is thought of as like a colossal blunder by the government. You know, they're hyping up, go to South Africa and farm. They get there and the land is useless for farming.
Right. Yeah. And I believe Cecil Rhodes originally went to Africa when he was like 17 to work on a cotton farm, right?
Right.
With his brother, which by the time he got there, his brother was already in the mines.
He was like, I'm gone. I'm out of here.
Exactly.
You know, and not everything he did was like, he didn't have the Midas touch. There were several things from the time that he was 17 going forward that just didn't pan out. And there are some things that are hyped up too, like the purchase of a truck. Everybody was like, oh, he negotiated this, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, the thing was purchased, you know, but everybody's turned it into this grandiose story.
Really?
Yeah. We'll get to that later. It's actually really funny.
I'm curious about that.
But, and it's one of those things where how many monopolies do we have nowadays? I know.
Well, I feel like we're getting more into monopolization again, or at least seeing companies pop up.
I feel like it goes in like on a sine wave where it kind of steps up and back down. But DeBeers might be the oldest running.
Yeah.
I mean, they're not as prevalent nowadays. I feel like within the last, 15, 20 years, there have been other companies that have popped up that are actually producing diamonds and are able to compete to some level.
But and other countries have found diamonds as well, right? And
they're very they're well educated and they kind of see what history has brought.
Exactly. They have the benefit of history.
Yes, they do.
To see how things go.
Exactly.
So right now, by 1880, DeBeers owns
right before.
DeBeers distributes 90% of the world's diamonds.
90% of the world's diamonds.
Today, they distribute 29.9% or somewhere around there. So about 30%.
Right.
And that's enormous drop off.
But do you think that there are it's kind of like saying Pfizer or Johnson & Johnson, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whenever they get into any kind of legal dispute or whatever, they simply make a shell company and sell those assets off to that shell company or to that subsidiary
right,
of theirs, and that arm of theirs takes the hit. Technically, it's not Pfizer or Johnson & Johnson, but it's still them,
right?
Like the whole thing with the talcum powder.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they marketed it straight to minorities, and knowing that it was a very cancerous product. So what did? They sold it off to a subsidiary and got rid of it.
Amazing.
So they get taken to court and they're like, it wasn't us. It was blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, when you have a monopoly over something, it's like, yeah,
You can do that.
Do that.
So I wonder how much of their business is actually there. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. I mean, there's that. You're absolutely right, because it could just be DeBeers controlled companies that
we're gonna find out though.
We are.
Yeah.
That's where we're digging. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, they have a history of being shady. I mean, they've got they
Let's
have
not go
had
that far. We still got to buy diamonds from them.
right. If we affect if our podcast affects DeBeers in any kind of way,
that's how you measure success.
Yeah, exactly. I will be shocked. But they have a history of actually buying
10 people.
Dare to dream.
Dare to dream. 10. All I need is 10.
But they have a history of buying diamonds, buying out an entire stock of diamonds from their competitors or people who try to compete, and then just slowly pushing them back into the market. And so they'll flood the market with diamonds once they have a competitor.
Are you talking about what happened in 1980s? Because they recently got sued for that.
They've done this a few times apparently.
Where they flooded the market.
They flooded the market with diamonds, which drops the price down.
Right.
Then they buy all of their competitors' diamonds at this lower price, and then just squelch the output of diamonds again to raise the price back up.
Nice.
Yeah, it's unreal.
To me, it's always fascinating how everybody's like, "Oh, it's such a rare stone." I don't think it is.
No.
Especially now. Because technology has made it possible for there to be lab-grown diamonds that are just as good.
Yeah, they're the same thing. They're just grown in a lab.
I love the fact that everybody's constantly telling us that don't sell these. Eventually the market's going to plummet.
Right. But
okay.
How much further can the market drop on something that's already significantly cheaper than a natural diamond? You know what I mean? Like,
question.
If you tell the client this is not necessarily an investment piece, right?
No, this is something you wear every day.
This is something you're going to wear every day.
Yeah.
And you're not planning. I mean, ideally, right? I know the divorce rate in America isn't great, but ideally, your plan going into this is to wear that ring for the rest of your life.
It is, but you can always upgrade.
Right. Yep.
Exactly, and I feel like that's one of the versatile things. I don't know, but that also is a whole other thing, right? Like everybody's talking about how they're the more responsible stone and blah blah blah, but the energy required to make these things is not, unsubstantial.
Yeah, it's not substantial. I mean,
it's a good amount of electricity that goes into this. Like the carbon footprint on a lab grown diamond.
Yeah, it's not small.
It's not small.
It's smaller than a natural diamond by comparison. I mean, you're using
the human side of things. Yeah, sure.
Well, but also water, right? You use 75% less water to create a lab-grown diamond.
Yes, you do.
Right? But, I mean, it's not necessarily that green.
No, it isn't.
By comparison.
No, it isn't. And I dare to say, especially after reading that article about the dealings between Botswana and DeBeers, that I don't think... Do you remember that movie with Leonardo DiCaprio?
Blood Diamond?
The Blood Diamond movie.
Yeah.
Oh my God. I get so many questions about that when people first learn what I do for a living. Mm-hmm. How can I be sure? You really can't. Like, I don't think you can.
No. I mean, that's the thing, right? I mean,
nobody's got eyes on that diamond from the time it comes out of the ground.
Except for DeBeers. We've just talked about this whole monopoly thing, right? Yeah. And it's like, I get diamonds. We get diamonds after they've passed through. We don't even know how many hands, right? Exactly. I mean, you've got the miner, you've got
the cutters,
you've got the wholesalers. Sometimes it goes through multiple wholesalers before it even gets to us, and it's like any one of those people could have said, okay, here's a diamond from Africa, but I'm going to do a Canada mark.
Exactly.
Thing. And
it's very easy to do.
And maybe there's a way to track, the certain type of diamond deposit mineral,
maybe
the trace minerals in those to figure out where their origin is.
Perhaps in the rough.
Right? Potentially. And it's like, that's great, but I don't know that.
Yeah,
I can't know that. All I can trust
classes at GIA.
But that's what I'm saying. All I can trust is GIA.
Exactly.
Right. And that's what we do. We trust the Gemological Institute of America to do all that research for us. But good news for the average customer, your insurance also trusts GIA to do all of this, right?
Yes,
so it's
so you have levels of security in order to maintain a clean sourced stone.
right.
Like that's a real thing.
Yes.
Not everything that's coming out of Africa is coming out of like a war-torn country and children are mining it. It does happen still, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, we've all heard the stories of people mining cobalt, you know, in those horrible situations. So it's definitely going on, but you can rest assured that not every single stone comes from those places.
Right.
And one way to ensure that would be to get like a GIA certified stone,
Right.
Or I don't really know any others.
Like I don't either.
I feel like they're the preeminent name in making sure that everything is what it is.
Yeah, you got GIA and what EGL, USA now, I guess, because they separated themselves from the international.
The problem with EGL that I find is that oftentimes I look at their stones and I always think it's a grade, and maybe it's biased just because, like I said, I've been in the industry for a very long time, and people often talk about how if you look at a GIA certified E-color and an EGL certified E-color,
right,
the EGL is going to be a grade, sometimes even 2 grades lower than the GIA, because GIA is so strict with their measuring guidelines.
Right,
you know?
right. Yeah, I mean that's totally true. You know, I even looked into this because we have a couple diamonds at the studio right now that someone's potentially interested in buying.
Right.
And one of the things they asked me was, do they have a GIA certificate? And I said, well, they don't. You know,
but we can get them certified.
Exactly. And so I looked into this, and you can actually get an origin report after sending the diamond in. So there must be a way.
Of course there is. There's like trace elements in them.
Exactly. To find those trace elements and trace it back to.
Most stones aren't exactly clean. Like there's always a thing or two inside of them.
Yeah.
Now, that being said, I can only imagine what it might have been like in 1800s to find a 100 carat stone, just absolutely crystal clear.
Yeah.
What did the natives think? I mean, think about it. Like they grew up around these things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, what's crazy to me is that while there were natives in the area,
right,
it wasn't really populated so much. Like there weren't a lot of people there.
It's hard to farm.
You know,
I think we covered that.
That's what I mean, right? So it's like there was no reason for anybody to be there until someone discovered diamonds. You know, I mean, there's obviously, you know, people could have lived there beforehand, but until the British, or I should say, until the Dutch showed up, because the Dutch were in control of South Africa at that point.
And they did not enjoy the fact that the Brits were there.
No, they did not. And we're definitely going to get into that next episode, because that is
a wild story too.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But we obviously we digressed going into diamonds and all that. But that's part of this, right? That's what Cecil Rhodes is doing.
That's what this podcast is about. It's about how his actions are going to shape the next
100 years at least.
Easy.
In diamonds.
Very easily.
And really in the jewelry market, because I don't know about your experience, but in my experience, a majority of sales these days are engagement and wedding bands.
Yes.
You know, and that's diamonds.
Yeah. I mean, diamonds are a girl's best friend, and they're a boy's best friend too.
And they're forever.
Yeah. Well, if you look at it chemically, they're actually breaking down over time, but neither here nor there. They're just in a very high state of order, you know, and carbon cannot maintain that state.
Whatever. Maintain that state longer than you're alive.
Yes. I mean, if you could put it in like a fast forward machine and watch it break down, it would be kind of cool. But
well, that would be cool.
It would. You know, there's a very famous experiment called the pitch experiment, where you know what pitch is, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So
why don't you explain it though for the people on the podcast, right?
So pitch is a byproduct of petrol, right?
Yeah.
And it looks like a solid, but it's actually a liquid. And there was an experiment that was I guess it was started in the 1930s, 1920s. I can't quite be sure. There's a website online right now that actually still has a camera on it. And what they've done is that they put a chunk of pitch inside of a funnel. And over time, you can see the pitch slowly working its way through the glass funnel and letting out a drop. so far, I think we've had 3 drops. The last drop happened 2009, I think. And
Okay, this is cool.
It is the longest running experiment that we have in America right
1930.
now. 1930.
Right, yeah.
There it is. Yeah.
1930. Wow.
Can we give the website out for that if anybody's
so
curious?
if anyone's curious, I just went to the Wikipedia page, but it's literally just called Pitch Drop Experiment.
Yes.
And that's it. And it was University of Queensland.
Right. So like there's
Australia.
you can it's in Australia.
Yeah, Brisbane.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, my mistake. So these things are also, like everything is on a timeline. And it would be great to be able to see a diamond actually break down over time because, like I said, the state in which the carbon is actually aligned is a high energy state. That's why it takes years and years of pressure and heat in order to get a diamond to be the way that it is.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is crazy. I'm just reading like just okay, just
yeah. Go ahead.
Going off on the tangent here. The ninth drop.
Ninth drop,
right?
Yeah.
So it was.
Man, I got everything about this wrong.
So well, this is really interesting to me. So the stem for the funnel was cut in 1930, right? So the experiment started. 1927 was when they poured it.
Wow.
So they waited 3 years before they
were able to. That's probably when it was getting close to the funnel tip.
Or maybe they had to get funding or advertising or some kind of a publicity,
Okay.
So 1938, the first drop fell. 1947, the next drop fell. 1954, 1962, 1970. So there's about an 8 year,
8 to 9
on
year
average 8 year, on
cycle.
average 1979. So 9 years. 1988, another 9 years. 2000, so 12 years, and then 2014.
Okay.
So about 13 to 14 years, 13 and a half years.
Right. What if that has to do with the amount of volume that's left in the container?
So, science, physics. So the 9th drop touched the 8th drop on 17th of April, 2014. However, and this is according to this Wikipedia page, it was still attached to the funnel. On the 24th of April, Professor White, who is now in control of the experiment, decided to replace the beaker holding the previous 8 drops before the 9th drop fused to them, which would have permanently affected the ability to further drop.
Oh, that guy
is a drop to form. Well, it says while the bell jar was being lifted, the wooden base of it wobbled, and the 9th drop snapped away from the funnel.
Oh, that guy ruined the experiment. I didn't know that he ruined the experiment.
Yeah, so that was 2014.
Do you think he thinks about that? I would think.
He thinks about that every day. He wakes up in the morning and just thinks,
I ruined the experiment that had been going on for almost 100 years.
1930.
Oh my God!
It's embarrassing.
That's embarrassing. He should be embarrassed.
That's man, just another guy just screwing up on accident. What are you gonna do?
He's just sitting around like, I should have just left it alone.
Yeah.
I've had those moments before. The one that stands out to me the most right now is the time that I chipped a 3-carat stone or a 2.5 carat stone.
Diamond or no?
It was a diamond.
Okay.
At the time, I think we were doing work for the Tiny Joe box, and everything was well enough set. Everything was tight, and I just didn't like the way that this one little bead looked. I went to put pressure on it, and bloop, that's all it took. Just diamond on diamond contact. Fracture went flying off. Diamond, I think, lost like 2% weight, which is a lot.
Which is a lot for a 3-carat.
It is.
Stone. Yeah.
It is.
Yeah. But I mean, that's.
Might have been 1%, but whatever.
Still, that's the risk you take.
Yeah.
Setting.
They're
every day.
Everybody always talks about how they're the hardest substance on Earth.
They're not that hard to break.
But they're super brittle.
They're not that hard to break.
Not at all.
So before we finish up, do you want to talk about the gender roles in the Victorian era, or do you want to just move into early diamond trade in Africa, like next episode?
No, I think we should definitely cover the finish up with what Cecil Rhodes was being born into.
Mm-hmm.
Like the gender roles are definitely a very important way that, I mean, I don't know. There's suspicion that maybe he wasn't heterosexual,
Mhm. Yeah.
but gender roles did play a part in his upbringing,
Yep.
And how he viewed the world. So yeah,
Right.
let's get into it.
All right. Yeah, I mean, this was Victorian England. So, women and men kind of followed this, quote, doctrine of separate spheres,
Yeah.
where essentially the teaching was men and women are biologically different, therefore they are meant for different things.
That's interesting. That's not the view that they have nowadays.
No. Actually, what's funny is, so I'm going to go through my notes here, and then I'm going to follow it up
Go ahead.
with
Go
what
ahead.
society actually
Let's turn the camera
right?
to Bryce. Go.
So women were expected to be seen free of any sexual desires and only submitted to those desires in order to please their husbands, right? This is according to this doctrine.
Whoa.
Yes. Middle-class women and upper-class women were actually proud of how little they actually understood about their bodies or even childbirth.
Interesting.
Which I can't even imagine at this point.
I can't either.
I can't imagine. I have 2 kids. I can't imagine my wife going into that labor room not
Who knows
knowing
what's going to happen?
anything,
Let's go.
or with any of her friends who have had kids talking to her, like, you know what I mean? And the men were not present at all during any of this.
Like we've just talked about that.
Exactly.
Most times they went off and tried to make their riches in another country.
Yep.
Away from their families.
Exactly. Gender was also seen, and like I said, as biologically based. So biologically based gender, which is not what you see today. We're moving away from that, and determined not only a person's expected character, but their potential within society.
So, wait, let me see if I understand what you're saying there. So what you're saying is that your gender would determine your character?
Yeah, how you acted, how you were expected to act, who you became, who you were expected to become.
It's very I like reading. I enjoyed a lot of Jane Austen's books.
Yeah.
I've introduced a lot of them to my wife when we discuss these things, right? And it's funny that you're going over this list of attributes of how they view gender roles, because that gets highlighted so well in her writing. I mean, wow.
Yeah. Crazy.
Yeah, and part of me thinks, like, sure, if I would have grown up in an era where you're told how to act as a man, word by word, I would be okay with that.
Yeah, right? I mean, like, that's the thing too, right? I mean,
what's expected of you as a person, the things that you got to do A, B, and C, dude, that would make life so much easier for me.
Right. Exactly.
I mean,
right?
That's just me.
You have a list of instructions.
Yeah.
You're literally told how to live. I mean,
I wouldn't do well with that era.
No.
I do not like told what to do.
Men, on the other hand, they were considered sexual deviants, right? Like, they could not control their sexual desires, and therefore it was on the woman. It was the woman's responsibility.
This sounds very familiar.
To dissuade the men, right, from advances, right? Women were not expected to be, like I said, they were considered free
asexual
of any sexual desires until their husband came into the room, right?
This is ISIS vibes, you know that?
Yeah, it has. Yeah. So women's roles were considered more private, right? So they included household upkeep and child rearing, whereas men had the more public view, and basically we're just talking about work and politics,
right?
So
both worlds where women wouldn't intermingle with us.
Exactly. So 2 notes. Most families couldn't even follow these societal expectations. You're talking about 3/4 of the population was working class, right?
Right.
So most households couldn't even afford to live on a single wage. I mean, you actually had a lot of women working at this time in factories, right?
Right.
Regardless, biological, we're talking about that. Smaller hands on average, which meant the
more
machinery,
dexterous.
more dexterous, exactly. Work the machinery, things like that. We've all heard about even during wartime, the women working in the factories, right? Pushing out armaments and all that during.
Forget all that. Like, what about the watches? Do you remember?
Watches? Yeah, that's right. Watches.
With the, Lumelite?
Yeah. Textile industry.
The textile industry? Yeah.
And so
these are all like preset rules that somebody wrote down, but these aren't things that actually happen.
So these
on a
are
day-to-day life.
yeah. So essentially, what this is these are. So I'm sure people have written papers on these things, right?
Yeah.
But this doctrine of separate spheres is kind of a written and unwritten social norm, according to the middle and upper class.
It's like something you can fall into and out of at will.
Essentially, yeah. But so this was basically all a front because society below, right, the majority of society consisted of prostitution, venereal diseases, and women who actually flaunted their sexual desires, and even men and women who did feel same-sex desire, right? So arts during this time, the Victorian era in England, were
everywhere.
I mean, you had it's like you had theaters like Starbucks at this time. They were just on every corner.
Nice.
Yeah. And so shows, music, theater, all of this was blowing up in England at this time. And so, you had a lot of this liberalism coming into society as well. And that's kind of transition us into like the abolition of slavery and why it didn't make such a crack.
The abolition of slavery within England.
Within England, yes. And that's why I'm saying why it didn't make such a crack as by comparison to other countries.
Right.
And I think that the colonies were a big part of that.
Yeah, because once you were outside of England, all rules were
right.
You could do what you wanted.
Yeah,
essentially.
And liberalism during this time became the majority, basically the majority doctrine, right? Like so most people by the end of the Victorian era were actually considered liberal in their views.
Interesting.
So the what you'd see the English government trying to pass laws that were actually liberal in nature, right? One example is that people of color could actually own a claim and do what they wanted with that diamond claim.
That's true.
Right? And then
to an extent, that's true.
Right. Well, the government tried to pass
that, but in reality, it was hardly ever the thing. Often they were accused of stealing or raiding other camps in order to attain the diamonds, and eventually they would end up in court. And
exactly. So
right, go on.
But the point, right? So you're trying to so England is becoming this liberal country by comparison, right, to the rest of the world.
Right.
But the people who have left, the immigrants, are not interested in this at all because they're trying to own businesses. They're still trying to be this
entrepreneurial dream.
Yes, they're still trying to follow their entrepreneurial dreams, this prosperity and wealth
that
the country has basically laid out before them. This is your opportunity.
It's going to be an interesting podcast. I feel like there's going to be a lot to be learned. I can't wait to get into the intricacies of how things were being mined because, just on the surface things that we've seen, like the yellow dirt, the blue dirt. It was like, what?
Kimberlite, right? Like where the name even came from.
Well, the whole naming, just because it didn't sound British enough.
Yeah. They're like, so
that's great.
Yeah. Kimberly was like, hey, I can't pronounce all these Dutch and German words. Let's get rid of them.
Yeah.
You know?
And it's funny because like every time I hear, oh, this comes from a Kimberly mine, I'm like, oh, that means good quality.
Right.
It's preset into us.
Exactly.
So, anyways,
just like the value of a diamond.
This is going to be fun. Tune in again next week. My name is Danny.
And I'm Bryce.
And this is going to be the Carrot Chronicles, and we're going to follow the diamond industry from then till now and see where things stand and what's changed and how things are going in Africa.
Yeah, and we're going to follow Cecil Rhodes on his way into Africa.
Yeah.
Next episode.
All right. Tune in. All right. See you guys.
See you.
Bye.